I'll count.
Hey there, my name's Christina Traster.
Christina is a fight master, fight director, and certified teacher with the Society of American Fight Directors. She's also an associate professor of acting and stage combat at the University of Michigan.
Today, I'll be breaking down clips from movies and TV about sword fighting. Tactical advantage, Game of Thrones.
I always drink before a fight.
It could get you killed. It could get me killed.
You know, drinking before you're gonna go in and try to fight to the death would be a really, really bad idea. So we see two very different body types and styles of fighting in here. We see what is a whirling dervish kind of form with a lot of spinning that's happening, a lot of changing of levels, going from full height down to a knee, spinning away from your opponent. He's also using what is almost a spear, a long quarterstaff with a spear point on the end. And that is good for his body type because he's keeping distance between himself and the mountain.
You raped her! You murdered her! You killed her children!
So his use of movement is brilliant because he is a moving target at all times. But what he's doing is a lot of deflecting parries that are happening. So as an attack's coming in, he's moving out of the way and deflecting the energy of it. So that's how he's able to go up against steel. I feel like Martel is more fit. So that cardio advantage, if the fight went on longer, I think would have been to his advantage versus the mountain. Where he messes up is he lets his guard down.
Can't die yet, you haven't confessed. Say it. Say her name.
And the mountain is genius. He just lays there and plays possum, right? Until... and it's all over because he is literally twice his body weight. Fighting when injured, Monty Python.
Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left. Yes, I have. Look! It's just a flesh wound.
If it's just a flesh wound, as they say, or a scratch, you could keep going.
What are you going to do, bleed on me?
It also depends upon the adrenaline dump that happens, right? The endorphins that start to kick in.
I'm invincible!
But in terms of organs being pierced or losing arms and legs, no.
How about you? Come on, then.
Is not very realistic, but is hysterical.
All right, we'll call it a draw.
Fencing techniques. The Princess Bride.
You're using Bonetti's defense against me, huh? Naturally. You must expect me to attack with Capafero.
But I find that Tibble cancels out Capafero.
Unless the enemy has a study, he's Agrippa.
So these terms, Agrippa, Bonetti, Capafero, they're all actually people who were fencing masters in Italy during the 16th century, although there is one Dutch dude that's in there.
No one of consequence.
They're referring to these men who were coming up for the first time with manuals that could be studied during that time.
You are wonderful.
Thank you. I've worked hard to become so.
So what's really interesting about the storytelling of this clip is that neither one of these characters has ever met their match before.
Why are you smiling? Because I know something you don't know.
So they start out with quick little moves.
And what is that?
I am not left-handed.
Then once they realize they finally have someone that they could compete with them, they switch to their dominant hand.
I'm not left-handed either.
What we try to do a lot of times is train with our non-dominant hand to strengthen our dominant hand. It also helps to balance out our fighting styles. So the one critique I would have about this scene is that the swords they're using are almost rubbery. They're going so fast that they're bending in frame. And if you're a nerd who's watched this clip like 7 gazillion times, you start noticing things like that.
You seem a decent fellow. I hate to kill you. You seem a decent fellow. I hate to die.
One of the things that's great about swashbuckling is a lot of times there's a lot of humor in it.
You're amazing.
It ought to be after 20 years.
And you see that in their cheeky expressions and the delivery of their lines that are also in time with the choreography. So they're rocking it.
Thank you.
Type of sword, Kill Bill.
This is Hattori Hanzo steel. Usotsuke.
So Hattori Hanzo was a 16th century Japanese samurai warrior who was amazing. Like, he was the best of the best. And he had a nickname of Demon Hanzo because he, quote unquote, fought like hell. So he really was a historical character. There is an insignia on the sword that lets you know the type that it is. And this was actually a common tradition with many armorers, not just for a katana, but also in European martial arts as well. Everyone knew if you had a sword from a high quality armorer, you pretty much knew what you were doing and had trained a lot, or you had money. So the bride fights all of these people to get to this moment. Her sword would absolutely be dull if she had taken down that many opponents. Now, it could still be feasible, but that this move could happen because it is like the ultimate of all samurai swords. But yeah, you would need to sharpen your sword. Shields, Troy. It's actually one of my biggest pet peeves is when fighters start too close. This is awesome because you need those first opening moments to kind of size your opponent up, see where they are physically, see where they are psychologically, emotionally, all of those things. You're trying to find the advantage that you can get. So it absolutely makes sense that you would start out of distance and then slowly work your way in. Shields are awesome because they're not just defensive weapons. They can also be used offensively as well. There are things called shield bashes where you get your body behind the shield and essentially turn yourself into a battering ram. You can see their armor, their legs are exposed, their arms are exposed. In this fight, their head is exposed. So you could slice with the end of that. I mean, we all know that thinner metal, you can cut yourself on it. So if you're using that with some force behind it, it could turn into an offensive weapon as well. So we do see two different shields in this clip, and they're completely historically accurate. There were all kinds of shapes and sizes. So we see in Brad Pitt's shield that he uses the notches on the side to rest his weapon at one point. It's kind of like picking different kinds of swords, different kinds of shields. After training with them for many years, you would find out kind of what your favorite was and what kind of played to your strengths as a warrior. So shields, like anything else, they're heavy, right? It's a big piece of metal. So you're having to work from your core a lot. Even though these men are both very fit, there's only so much that your rotator cuff can take in terms of torque, right? So it makes sense towards the end that they are becoming more fatigued.
Don't take my glory.
They're ditching their shields and just going for the weapons that are going to impact the other opponent and inflict some damage to them. Fencing terminology. I love you, man.
Bro, really sorry I lost my shit out there. I just did not see that encortada coming.
Oh, hey man, don't worry. You know, you came in with a pretty sweet glazade.
So what's cracking me up about this clip and why it just, I'm sorry, seems so bad is that they're mispronouncing the first two terms, which could easily have been looked up.
Encortada glazade.
These are all French terms, and not that you have to be hoity-toity French when you say them, but it is definitely not glazade.
Glazade.
It's glazade. Encortada, he almost gets right.
Encortada.
But it's just, everything is so anglicized with American pronunciation that it takes away any value that these guys have been studying this stuff for years.
Wow. Way to go, buddy.
Encortada and glazade are actually moves in fencing.
Anybody see my man Shet?
You look under your plastron, dick wicker?
The last two terms are items of equipment.
Man, shit.
Plastron?
The first being gloves, the second being the protective quilted vest, in a sense, that protects your organs. It's like they have no sense of what they're saying.
Classic.
What's also funny is this locker room is set up like it's a sport like basketball or football, and they just have their foils hanging there in the locker room, which would not be the case. They're metal. They will rust. You need to oil them down. You need to store them properly. It's not just having like racks of basketballs on the side. Sportsmanship. Hook. Yes, it was very unsportsmanlike for Hook to use his hook to slice Peter's wrist. He's absolutely right that they are engaged in this combat and Hook is essentially cheating. Bad form would be kind of an archaic way to show that you were not pleased with the way that Hook was performing. But then you kind of have to go, well, he's a pirate. So is there any code of conduct with pirates? No.
He's just a mean old man without a mommy.
The maneuver that Peter is using to disarm Hook is an envelopment with an expulsion. He effectively parries Hook's attack, and then with a really quick revolution of his wrist, he swings that around close and takes it, removes it from Hook's hand, and then uses another flick of his wrist to send it soaring onto the ground. You see Peter trying to be sportsmanlike and Hook coming in and playing dirty. But in the end, it still doesn't matter because Peter's technique is better than Hook's.
Good form, Peter.
2-on-1. Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. Whenever you have 2 against 1, in theory, it should be harder for the 1 to defend against the 2. And the 2 had a lot of tactical advantages. So they should have been attacking him at the same time. They could have started both facing off with him so that he had to defend 2 things. Or if they are behind, there's a lot of vulnerable parts that they could have been attacking. When Darth Maul runs away, he is using divide and conquer, right? He's trying to separate them, but then you see young Obi-Wan just kind of sauntering over to him. I don't understand why that's not a running attack and why they're not still pressing him. So if you're Darth Maul, you're trying to take 1 opponent at a time. You don't want to fight 2 at once. We see that he finally has success when he's able to separate those opponents between the dividers and can take them on 1 at a time. Sparks, blade. So if you hit blades completely edge to edge, you wouldn't have as much spark, but if you're angling things slightly, so it has to do with the trajectory and the force combined that would create it. To have this amount of sparks, you would obviously have to have some effects that were being laid in post-production to create that. Every time that you do that, you are inflicting damage on the edge of your sword, creating burrs, little divots that are going to have to be dealt with to maintain a sharp edge. And over time, it would immeasurably keep deteriorating. I mean, they're immortal, so they probably don't care if they're doing damage to their blades.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
Teaching. Game of Thrones.
Who are you?
Your dancing master, Sirio Forel. Tomorrow you will catch it.
So in this clip, we see a very young Arya, right, with Sirio, her teacher, who is teaching her the beginning fundamentals of swordplay. What is the proper stance? What is the way you should hold the sword? What is the fluidity that you should have with the weapon?
That is not the way, boy. It is not a great sword that is needing 2 hands to swing it.
Too heavy.
And we can see right away that when you've never held anything like this, it's kind of a intricate, multi-layered concept.
It is heavy as it needs to be to make you strong. Just so. 1 hand is all that is needed. The grip must be delicate.
There's actually a phrase that says you want to hold the sword like a bird, not so tight that you crush it, but not so loose that it flies away. And what you mean by that is that you want to have control over the sword, but if you strong arm it and grip it tight, you're going to lose fluidity and reaction, all of that. So they're doing a fencing style that is all about a piercing weapon, how it's not something that you would handle roughly like a battle axe, but it's something that's light and fluid. That's all pretty good. So for this particular weapon style, her frame is perfect because she's quick and light, kind of like a mosquito, right? Just moving fluidly and going fast.
Dead? Oh, dead. Very dead.
There are several times within it that there are cutting techniques. Those are attacks that are used with the edge of the weapon as opposed to thrusts, which are used with the sharp point of the sword. We're not looking to cut limbs. We're literally thinking of it as a needle that is trying to poke organs, quick and fatal, and you could bleed out easier.
Just so.
Fighting in a parking garage. Highlander. So they use the environment in an interesting way. I mean, it's cool to fight on top of car hoods. I don't know if you really need to run across them. I don't know if you need to be flipping off of a car hood when you could just jump. I would be using these cars as ways to hide and try to surprise my opponent. These swords now, after the sprinkler system is hit and after the electricity is compromised, they're basically running around with lightning rods almost that are going to be conduits for electricity. The other thing that confuses me is the round off back handsprings. I'm not sure how you would do those with your sword. There's a lot more tactical things that you could do with this environment rather than kind of throwing everything in the kitchen sink with trying to make things more fantastical and quote-unquote cool moves of the 80s. Weapon selection. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I love the selection of the first weapon style because it's in effect double fence. She's using 2 swords, one in dominant and non-dominant hand, and you really, with the choreography, get to see what it would be like to have 2 weapons against one. I also love it because it starts off with her strong suit, so she's clearly choosing the weapons that she feels more comfortable with. So what's so great about this clip is that you see Michelle Yeoh's character is older, way more experienced. Her character brings this vast experience of all these different weapon forms. To have that level of expertise, you would have had to have been studying your entire life to be able to work with all those different weapons. You're going to keep picking the ones that you feel strongest until you're down to with what you've got. Now, what is great is that her opponent would need to know the strengths and weaknesses of each of the other weapon styles so that she would know how to wear those weapons down, either how to disarm them, to destroy them, or to keep her opponent on the move. Different types of opponents. Gladiator. He has two weapons, a sword and an axe. And then Russell Crowe's character has a gladius and a shield. You're both double fence. You both have your sword in your dominant hand and your additional weapon in your other. So I think Russell Crowe actually is doing a good job. He's using that shield to deflect blows as much as possible, particularly with the axe. And he's also using it as an offensive weapon. When the tide turns between the two of them, it's because he took the edge of his shield and knocked that helmet. And then immediately goes for the vulnerable part, right? The foot. Even though Maximus Decimus Meridius is like an amazing tried and true soldier on the battlefield, he's essentially a prisoner of war. This other guy is still way bigger than he is. So it could go either way. You could say that the larger guy could have the upper hand because it's a smaller playing space. But Russell Crowe is just a better fighter in the end. He's faster. He never stops moving. He changes levels. He's keeping his eye on all parts of his playing area.
You simply won't die.
It's that whole thing of wearing your opponent down really comes into play with this and taking them by surprise. Grabbing a blade, Rob Roy. You would definitely have damage if you grabbed a blade, and we can see that with Rob Roy. What lends itself for us to believe him a little bit more are a couple of things. The first being that he's ginormous. So you kind of buy that he could grab that. The second thing is that it's a desperation move. It's the end of the fight. You will always sacrifice this to protect your core. So even if you did shred your hand, it's better than being dead. So there is a bit of willing suspension of disbelief in this clip because it feels like Tim Roth, his character, is waiting a bit. If someone had grabbed the end of my blade, I would just pull that to do more damage. Those are all lost opportunities to essentially finish off that character. Sharps versus sporting swords. Die another day.
You want to continue? Of course I want to bloody continue! But since we're upping the wager, let's up the weapon, shall we?
So the term sharps versus a sporting sword or a stage combat sword. The sharps are what we would call live weapons, right? Something that is a real sword that is sharpened to a point. A sporting sword or a theatrical sword, those have dull edges and dull points. The ones that we train with actors are actual real weapons. They're just not sharpened. But you still have to teach safe technique for them because they could still do damage.
On out.
So we're looking at traditional foils with all of the protective gear in the sporting version of the match. There's a little kind of error that I'm seeing here in that the protective gauntlet, the glove comes up purposely to protect the wrist portion of your sword fighting hand, but I don't see how that foil tip with a button could have gotten to skin to make that happen.
Let's do this the old-fashioned way. First blood drawn from the torso.
Once they switch to the sharps, they're getting sabers that have a cutting edge. Any rules can be set. Whenever you're dueling in a traditional sense, you set those rules, those terms, before you have the match. You can see in the beginning when they switch to sabers that they're starting on a line and they're starting with a little bit of form, although they have cutting attacks. But then then once the first point of danger and the injury happens, all of that form goes out the window. Once the stakes are up and they're using sharps, they take off all of their protective gear and the fighting style starts to devolve in a sense and becomes more flailing.
Conclusion.
Overall, I would say that Hollywood tends to get right about these clips that sword fighting is exciting. It's something that is otherworldly that we understand, but we don't normally see people in everyday life fighting with swords. An actual duel, an actual sword fight, a lot of times would be very quick, but it also wouldn't be as entertaining to see on the big screen.